Hey, just a heads up that the following content may be disturbing or triggering for some listeners and is not appropriate for children. Please take care of yourself and others who may be listening with you. Welcome to the Bonus Babies Podcast, a show that has no easy answers, only hard questions.
When I was first taken, pulled from my mom's arms on a public sidewalk. I was thrown into a car, not told where I was going, and driven to a place called MacLaren Hall. Now, that is a place that folks in Los Angeles, many folks will remember. MacLaren was an abandoned polio hospital on the outskirts of LA County. It was in Duarte. It was a place that Los Angeles County packed hundreds of children. So there were corridors and basements and large dormitories, and it was a population that LA County mixed that had very small young children like me. So I was taken the week before my 7th birthday. Took little children like that and combined them with adolescent offenders in the juvenile justice system in a very poorly supervised environment. And so that was a place where violence was extremely common. I will say that Los Angeles County, when I was a kid, was asked to shut it down. As a matter of fact, the grand jury, the year after I left as a little boy, actually said, tear it down, demolish it. Los Angeles County kept it running until 2003, long enough for me to return back to Los Angeles to represent children and to go before the Board of Supervisors and say, tear it down.
Can you tell me what you call the kids who you've cared for over the years?
We feel that the children that we receive coming into our home are bonuses. So we call them bonus babies.
I love that. This is your host, Jayne Amelia Larson, and I'm a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate volunteer for youth in foster care. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful. In the same way a CASA works, I explore all things in the foster care maze by talking to kids, parents, caregivers, attorneys, social workers, therapists, really anybody and everybody who will speak to me to keep the conversation open and the information flowing about all things CASA.
Hi, this is Jake Eberly, the producer of the Bonus Babies podcast. And today, Jayne Amelia speaks with Andrew Bridge. Andrew Bridge was in foster care from the age of 6 to 18. He aged out, earned a scholarship to Wesleyan University, and graduated from Harvard Law School. He's now a child advocate and the author of the best-selling book, Hope's Boy, and his best-selling second book, The Child Catcher, released in 2024, and is the true story of the fight to rescue children confined to a violent and secretive institution in the rural South. Here's Andrew Bridge.
Hi, I'm here with Andrew Bridge. Thank you, Andrew. You got on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, congratulations to you because you've had a lot of successes. I want to talk about your new book, The Child Catcher, and also about your first book, Hope's Boy, which was also a bestseller. And I want to know, how did you arrive at that? Did you just have the story in, you want to tell it, or how did that roll out?
I'm kind of surprised too, I have to be honest. I think, in terms of writing, first of all, thank you so much. That's a very kind thing to say. I appreciate it. I think I was very fortunate to have really good teachers and in some ways merciless teachers. So I remember, for example, in high school having a merciless AP English teacher who used to say, a monkey writes 100 sentences, he'll come up with one good one. Good luck with your essay tonight. So just having that kind of knuckle down, I'm going to do this. And for folks who want to write, a book out there, you just sit down and you keep doing it, and you have a lot of patience with yourself and with other people.
Yeah, that's very well said. Of course, writing is rewriting, and then rewriting, right? Now, you spent your adolescence in foster care.
Actually, I spent from the age of 7 to 18.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so 11 years in foster care. And you had a very rough time, didn't you?
Yeah, it was, I would say from beginning to end, looking back at it objectively as someone who's worked in child welfare, it was a pretty seriously botched case, a case that we'd want to take a look at as a professional and see what happened here. And that started from the moment that I was taken. I was literally grabbed from my mother's arms on a public sidewalk as she stood there screaming in a pair of shorts, barefoot, and a bra. That is a bad taking. The other thing is, I didn't need to be in foster care at all. Had any judge, lawyer, or social worker asked, Andy, do you have family? I would have said that I had a grandmother, a great uncle, a great aunt, an uncle, and cousins, and that was just on my mom's side.
Wow, that didn't come up at all?
No one asked.
Oh.
And so as a result, I spent, you said 11, it was actually nearly 12 years in foster care and not ever needing to be there.
So how did you happen to have good teachers? Was that luck, or did you seek them out? Did you seek out adults who you knew could maybe help you?
School was a really valuable place for me, and one of the most important things that it did, it was the one place where I didn't have to be a foster child. That label didn't hang over me. I never ever told anyone that I was in foster care. The only time that I referred to the people that I lived with as mom and dad was at school. Never in home, never house, never referred to that to their face. It was when I was talking to teachers, oh, my mom and dad, even though they were the farthest from that. The other thing I'd say is that, and I think this is one of the kind of great American tragedies, is that the public educational system that I went to simply doesn't exist anymore. LAUSD, when I went to school, was a robust, excellent school district, and that just isn't the case anymore. And so had the great fortune of having extraordinary teachers who did their job, who were allowed to do their job, and who, in their own way, and sometimes, as I said, in quite a direct, unsparing way, um, helped me. And, for example, helped me learn how to write.
Yeah, they really did. I would imagine you had a lot of talent probably coming up, and they recognized it and they nurtured it as you say, in a hard way, to a degree. I am curious. You lived in the same foster home most of your years in care. Did you bounce around, or how did that work out?
So, so when I was first taken, pulled from my mom's arms on a public sidewalk. I was thrown into a car, not told where I was going, and driven to a place called MacLaren Hall. Now, that is a place that folks in Los Angeles, many folks will remember. MacLaren was an abandoned polio hospital on the outskirts of LA County. It was in Duarte. It was a place that Los Angeles County packed hundreds of children. So there were corridors and basements and large dormitories. And it was a population that LA County mixed that had very small young children like me. So I was taken the week before my 7th birthday, took little children like that and combined them with adolescent offenders in the juvenile justice system in a very poorly supervised environment. And so that was a place where violence was extremely common. I will say that Los Angeles County, when I was a kid, was asked to shut it down. As a matter of fact, the grand jury, the year after I left as a little boy, actually said, tear it down, demolish it. Los Angeles County kept it running until 2003, long enough for me to return back to Los Angeles to represent children and to go before the Board of Supervisors
Shut
and
it
say,
down,
tear
tear
it
it
down.
down. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they did finally in 2003. Uh, to be clear, though, they didn't do it out of conscience. They did it because of a lawsuit. They did it to make the lawyers go away. So after I left MacLaren, I was kept there for a year. And I was released. I'm not entirely sure the reason why I was released, other than a year was a very long time to keep a child that young and small in a congregate institution like that. But certainly one of the reasons was likely that I'd simply gone mute. I'd stopped talking. And so I was placed in a foster home all the way across the county. And I realized that there are people nationwide listening to this. But you have to imagine a drive that would now take you probably about, I don't know, an hour and a half to get you from Duarte to Woodland Hills.
At least, yeah.
And at
Hmm.
least, at least. And I was dropped off. The social worker who I'd never seen before, this was a different social worker, she bent down to me and she said, Andy, I'll be back. She promised to be back in 2 weeks, and she never came back.
Wow.
And so I spent the next 10 years there. I'd say that the biggest advantage of the home was that I never left it. But again, having recruited foster families, having managed foster families within child welfare, I think it's very safe to say that today that family would be delicensed
Wow.
and a child would not be allowed to stay there. It was a brutal environment. My foster mother was violent. She had a habit of waking me up in the middle of the night, telling me to pack my things, and announcing that I was going back to MacLaren in the morning. I'd wait there at the side of my bed, literally until sunrise, be told by her that I could go to school. I'd go to school, keeping a straight face. And then I'd come back and looking for that one thing that every foster child looks for when they're coming home, and that's a stranger's car in the driveway. And that car never appeared. And it was simply a game. It was something that's for some reason she wanted to do.
Wow, what a cruel, cruel game.
It was a bit cruel.
How did you survive that, Andy?
I think that at its core, despite the things that my social workers said, despite the things that my foster parents said, I knew that my mom loved me.
Hmm.
I entered foster care for folks who don't know, no reason to read my books. I entered foster care because my mother was a 24-year-old woman. She didn't go to college, didn't graduate from high school. She went to beauty school.
Beauty school, right? Yeah.
She cut hair. She loved hair. She loved cutting hair. And my dad abandoned us. And for the first year or so, I was living with my grandmother. She asked that I come back to Los Angeles. And for the first year or so of living with her, things were fine. She had a job. We had an apartment. And then she developed paranoid schizophrenia. And that's when things fell apart. So we lost our apartments. We lived in the back of a garage. We lived in a minister's bedroom for a while, and finally ended up in that flop house of a motel on Lancashire Boulevard in North Hollywood, California.
Mm. And this is all detailed in Hope's Boy, which is a very, very beautiful book, very moving. And I'm struck by, even now as an adult, you have much the same look as you have in the picture on the cover of that book, which is a very alert and vulnerable expression, waiting to see what's going to happen next, and possibly anticipating how you're going to handle it.
No one has ever said that to me. And I thank you for that observation. I appreciate that. I think that what that would be called, and I haven't really thought of this before, is what you see in so many children who've undergone severe trauma, and what that would be hypervigilance.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that need to be aware of what's going on around you, what may happen, who's there, how are they responding to you, how might that response change, what's going to happen next. And I think that was something I struggled with very much as a little boy, as a teenager, certainly as a young adult. And I think as I've grown older, it has relaxed somewhat, but it is always there.
Hmm.
I'm always sort of keenly aware of what's next, and it can be absolutely exhausting.
Yeah, it is.
That's
It's
right.
totally exhausting. I see that in other youth in care whom I know. It is an acquired condition that it's almost absolutely necessary for them to read the room, read the room, read the room, because it might mean their survival, right?
Yeah, I think and in some ways, those are great skills.
Yeah.
It means, I learned very quickly, how to read a room. I'm sure it helped during my college interviews. I'm sure it helped, while practicing law. But like all these things that we learn in moments of trauma, those tools work exceptionally well in the moment that we've gone through that trauma and immediately after, but then with time, they don't work quite as well.
Right.
They don't fit as neatly as they used to. And that's where the struggle is. That's the rub.
So you ended up becoming an attorney. And probably those skills served you there as well, right? And uh, and you went to my alma mater. You went to Harvard, and you could have gone on to make a boatload of money in all kinds of different ways, but you chose not to. Tell me about that.
Well, first of all, I have to say how extremely grateful I am to have gotten the education that I did get. Um, I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut undergrad with a full scholarship, and then went to Harvard Law School. And those places, in many ways, were my first truly stable homes. And I will always be so grateful for what they've brought me and what they gave me as a student. I did, after law school, practice law. I practiced corporate finance in a big Los Angeles law firm called Manat, Phelps and Phillips at the time.
Of course. I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have remembered that. Yeah.
Very,
I just went
very,
right to the hero. Sorry about
no,
that,
no,
sir.
no, a very well-known law firm, very famous place, very influential, very powerful, very, very smart people, and they were very kind to me, which is an unusual thing for a young associate to say about any law firm. But they were always very nice to me. The issue was money just never really interested me that much. And in many ways, the practice of law, certainly part of it, is this recognition that someday you're going to be pretty wealthy. And you're going to have, a big house on the West Side somewhere, or you're going to have, that BMW whatever series. And those things were just not motivators. And I can recall getting out of law school and really thinking, when I'm old and gray and people ask me what I did, I want to say that I'm doing something more than I'm doing now. And I say that with all deference and respect and for Manat. But I just wanted to do something different. And that meant going back to the system and the children that I remembered growing up. And in the child catcher, that also meant going back to the places where my mother had spent time in institutionalized care with paranoid schizophrenia.
Of course, of course, that's part of the story, isn't it? That's part of it.
Yeah, I was very lucky. It was the child catcher is about a very large class action lawsuit that was really one of the most bitterly fought federal civil rights lawsuits in the country over the rights of people and institutions. And that very much was what had happened to my mom. So all of the standards, all the requirements for people who are in institutions really were set by this case called Wyatt. I was responsible because I didn't have any experience practicing law at this point, really, other than a few years at a law firm. And the most time that I'd ever spent in a courtroom was my own foster care hearings. I was responsible for children in the case, which meant I was responsible for children at an institution in Southeast Alabama called Eufaula. Eufaula is one of the most notorious institutions in the South. It opened just about the same time that I left MacLaren. Eufaula opened. It had operated for decades. Thousands of children had gone through it. It was a place where children were over medicated, over secluded. It was extremely violent. The year before I got there, 2 children, 2 boys, had hanged themselves. And so the child catcher is about the fight that I took part in, and there were many more senior, far more talented lawyers on this small team to work to close this institution down, and the children that I met there.
And it took years and years, right? This was like how many years was
So the lawsuit, it took, at the time, it was 24 years old.
Wow.
And when I got to Eufaula, the state of Alabama, and I think this is important, the state of Alabama kept children. It was an abandoned radar base. The state of Alabama kept children in a basement. It kept children in cells. This was widely known. It kept children, it used fire extinguishers on children. Staff abused children by throwing them face down on sidewalks, pinning them up against walls. All of this was known, and it was shown through internal documents that the state held and that we eventually they had to hand over. And the thing about it is, when we finally got to trial, there was not one adult from the state of Alabama, from Eufaula all the way up to Montgomery to the state bureaucracy. There was not one adult who stood up and said, "This is wrong," who agreed to testify.
Wow. No one.
No one.
Wow. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there wasn't even one person that was willing to put themselves on the line?
I think when it comes to, I hesitate to speculate too much on people's individual motives. I want to be respectful. The way I would answer it is my own experience working with children in other large institutions like Eufaula. The people who run these institutions, first of all, I'd say there's a lot of money here.
A lot of corruption, a lot
These
of money.
institutions,
Yeah.
they exist all across the country. Thousands of children are kept in these institutions. On average, they cost $100,000 a month, up to you can spend $400,000. It is enormously expensive. So if you're paying $100,000 a month, that would compare to probably around somewhere between $12,000 to $15,000 a month to keep a child in a foster home, and it would cost even less if we kept the child with their family.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a lot of money to be made and a lot of jobs to be protected. And so these institutions, for example, Eufaula was placed in one of the poorest parts of Alabama where jobs were needed the most. And so it was very, very viciously defended by the state of Alabama. I think the other thing is the nature of folks who, particularly frontline staff, who are responsible for the individual care of children every day. If you think of out there, if you think of that babysitter, that person you leave your child with in the afternoon before you get home from work, that's the frontline staff. And while that babysitter, while that person is looking after your child, they have complete control over their life. And that's what these frontline staff do. Now, the thing with this is these positions are filled by people with little expertise, often without a college degree, maybe not a high school degree. It is a job that is taken for the paycheck. And that is reflected in the kind of care that children get.
Yeah, so the story that you tell in The Child Catcher, it is much through the experiences of one boy in particular. Can you tell me about him, and why did you choose him? Because I'm sure there were probably several boys you could have focused on, or what did he just fit the bill in terms of being able for you to tell as complete a story as possible about your experience there?
Well, there were two boys that are important. One boy, and I can use their names because they're families, and they were kind enough to give me permission to do that. One boy was David Dolehite. What Alabama did is Alabama advertised to families that this was a place to send your child if you were having trouble. So if your child was skipping school, your child was taking the car, your child was sneaking out, your child was smoking, this was a place the state of Alabama said, give us your child, and in 8 weeks you'll get a new kid. We'll fix your kid. And so in the case of David Dolehite, what happened, as so many families, they ran the route. So they took David to therapists, and then the insurance money ran out. They took David to school, they took David to their church, all of these things, and nothing quite worked. And so finally, at the advice of the state, they placed David in Eufaula. What happened was David was ignored at Eufaula for about 10 days, left to languish alone in this facility, and he spiraled down. Now, the thing about David is every time David's parents called and said, I'd like to speak to David, the response was, as was with every child, well, David's not here. David's on restriction. We don't know where David is. David just can't come to the phone. And so in the case of David Dolehite and his parents, they decided to do what so many parents did, and that is, I've had enough. I want my child back.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what would happen is parents would go back to Eufaula. They'd say, I admitted my child voluntarily. I'd like my child back. And the receptionist said, fine, go get your kid. They pack up their child, go to the ward, pack everything up, go to the parking lot, and then a sheriff's deputy would tap them on the shoulder. And they'd say, while your child was here, your child got into an altercation with another child, or your child got into an altercation with a staff member. As a matter of fact, when you admitted your child, you said that your child took money from your purse, or that your child took your car. Those are all crimes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a choice. You can take your child and put him back where you got him, back inside, or I'm going to arrest your child and put him in the juvenile justice system. So they were literally caught. Now, in the case of David Dolehite, what happened is David was kept in seclusion. For every hour that David received in therapy, David was secluded for 33 hours.
Yeah.
And when the Dolehites announced that the day that the Dolehites said they were coming to see David, the state of Alabama called and said, you should go to Birmingham instead. And what happened is David had walked into the wardroom closet and hanged himself. And he survived. And so that story is a very important one. And the Dolehites are extraordinary people. And what happened to David was beyond wrong. The other boy, though, is Wayne Tatum.
Of course, yeah.
And Wayne Tatum was a little guy. He was 13. Oddly, he looked a little bit like me. There's a lot of teasing that I looked like a big brother. I think he wanted a big brother. And Wayne agreed to testify. So Wayne agreed literally to go into federal court and testify against the state of Alabama. So I don't know how many folks out there have been to a Southern courtroom, but the courtroom that I took Wayne into to prepare him for trial was the same courtroom that Martin Luther King had appeared in, that the March on Selma had been allowed to go through, that basically all of the civil rights fights had taken place in the state of Alabama. And it is a beautiful courtroom. Alabama prizes its courthouses. If you take a look at To Kill a Mockingbird, that courthouse is based on the courthouse that Harper Lee remembered from Monroe County. Taking little Wayne and putting him into that oak witness box, Wayne was so tiny, he stood about 4'2", weighed 80 pounds. You could barely see the top of his head.
How old was he then, would you say?
Wayne was 13.
Mm-hmm.
I had him on the stand. He was the very first person that I ever examined on a witness stand. I had him on the stand for about 3 hours. We went through the most painful parts of his life, about his mother's suicide, about the difficulties that his grandparents had, and then the Attorney General of the state of Alabama, addressing that 80-pound witness as Mr. Tatum, kept him up there for another 2.5 hours. When the opinion came, it was largely based on Wayne's testimony. And so the importance of this is so few of these cases ever make it to federal court and ever make it to the law. And what happens with these places is when children are hurt, they're settled out.
Right.
So the institution will sit down with parents and a decision will be arrived at how much will it take to go ahead and have you not proceed with the lawsuit.
Right, to shut you up, essentially. Yeah.
I think that's a fair way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
How did Wayne have the courage to do that? He must have been terrified. I mean, I'm sure you were good comfort, but he had to have some sense of what he's doing. How did he do that, you think?
Wayne was a remarkable boy. Wayne was a strong, smart, funny, very, very intelligent, clever boy. And I think it also helped that Wayne came from a loving home. And that way we sort of shared. I mentioned that I knew that my mom always loved me, and Wayne had a grandma, and Wayne's grandma loved him. So I think that had a lot to do with it. Now, Wayne, unfortunately, what happened with Wayne was After the trial, the state of Alabama refused to return Wayne home to his family. Even though his grandmother was perfectly capable of taking care of him with some support, they refused to return Wayne home. So Wayne spent the next 6 years in Alabama's child welfare system, went through 40 placements.
Oh my
So that
gosh.
means that on average, if you do the math, every 6 weeks, Wayne was placed in another facility, in another foster home, in another group home, in another environment. When Wayne left at age 18, he had a GED, a ninth grade education, and was given a bus ticket home to Andalusia.
What happened to Wayne, Andrew?
Wayne Wayne's story is a truly tragic one. After Wayne returned home as an 18-year-old, Wayne had difficulty finding a job, and Wayne did something I know no other way to put it other than just terribly stupid. Wayne walked into a laundromat with what he said was a BB gun.
Mm.
And Wayne had grown a bit. He stood about 5'2", and he held it up. As he was holding it up, the woman literally looked at him and said, "Are you kidding?" He said he was, and he walked out with a Ziploc baggie of quarters and nickels. Now, Wayne wasn't hard to recognize. A 5'2" guy in a little town like Andalusia, was pretty easy to see him. The woman saw Wayne. He was doing part-time work at that point at the Burger King. Saw him behind the Burger King counter. Wayne was arrested. Wayne was assigned a public defender. The public defender told Wayne to do what is called a blind plea. And for non-lawyers, what a blind plea is rather than negotiate with a prosecutor, if I plead guilty, I will receive this punishment. So if I plead guilty, I will be put on probation. Or if I plead guilty, this is the limit of my maximum sentence. A blind plea does none of that. What a blind plea does is I plead guilty, you do what you like. You literally throw yourself at the mercy of the judge. Now, I suspect the reason why Wayne did that is he was appearing in front of the very same judge who'd overseen his foster care case, who'd known him since he was 13, who had known him at Eufaula, and who'd overseen those 40 placements. So when Wayne did that, that same judge sentenced Wayne to 21 years in state prison. Wayne got out of state prison a year ago last January, serving every day of those 21 years for robbing a laundromat.
Wow, just to think about how he was failed all the way along the line.
Well, and the irony, and we talk about this sort of trans-institutionalization, is Wayne was raised by the state.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Wayne entered the state care when he was 12, and during his adult life, he was out of state care for, a year and a half, and then he returned to state care at one of Alabama's state prisons. And it's beyond unfair. This is just base cruelty. This is disrespect for the value of life.
Yeah, I agree with you, Andrew. You've essentially been a child advocate all your adult life, and it doesn't look like you're slowing down. Do you have any children?
My husband has two boys. They're wonderful. I'll say their first names, Kyle and Brad.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give a shout out to them.
Hi, boys.
And they are amazing young men. One of the things I joke with is the one thing that you want most with your child and raising them is to end up with an adult who has empathy.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
And Brad is a talented, amazing bassist who has so much empathy and is just absolutely lovely. Kyle works in computer programming and also is just one of the most empathetic and kindest people I know. So I am. If you read the dedication to the back of the book, you'll see how fond and how much I love them.
Yeah, it sounds like that's a nice, happy place to be for you and them, really. Now, of course, when you were a young boy. You didn't have a casa. So how did you land on I'm going to call you a casa groupie. That's what I call my partner. He's a casa groupie. Uh, he doesn't want to be a casa. He's not going to ever be a casa, but he's certainly loves him. He supports him, and he wants to see more of them. How did you land on that if you didn't have one as a child?
So I could have had one. The CASA program certainly existed.
Yeah,
And for
it
folks
did.
who don't know,
Hmm.
they're court-appointed special advocates, and what they are is they are volunteers who visit children um, in foster homes and get to know children in a way that lawyers and social workers don't have that opportunity to. They go to court and they are allowed to talk about what they know about that child. And so the reasons why CASAs are so important, and I'll give examples. For me, if I had had a CASA when I was taken from my mom, I'm pretty confident in trying to get to know me. That CASA would have asked, "Tell me about your family." That CASA would have wanted to know who Andy was. And knowing who Andy was would have had to know, you would have had to know where Andy came from. And so that's one reason.
And that you had maybe relatives who wanted to have you in their lives. That's what the
I
casa would have
I
found
had
out
a
too.
lot of relatives, yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to remember also that by the time I was taken into care, my mom was seriously mentally ill. We were virtually homeless, and so these connections had been so attenuated, but I still had them in my head. And a CASA would have asked that. The other thing is, what CASAs do is because they know children so well, when you go into a child welfare hearing, a foster care hearing, and a judge asks, "Who of you here can tell me what Andy's report card was like?" And I say this as a lawyer, it's highly unlikely that the lawyer's going to know. It's highly unlikely that the social worker will know. And in fact, the social workers in that courtroom may not even be the child's own social worker. It'll be the CASA who knows what that report card looked like. And when the judge asks, "Is there anything that Andy's interested in? Is there anything Andy's good at?" It's the CASA that will know that. And very often, the CASA is the only person involved in a child's life who isn't being paid to be there. And so, what they do more than anything, in my mind, from the moment that my mother's rights were removed, my mother ceased to have any meaningful role in my life. She never went to a holiday concert. She never met a teacher that I had. She never met a friend. She was never invited to dinner. She was capable of doing all those things. What that does is it produces a tremendous sense of loneliness with foster children. And when you sit and you talk with kids, they talk about lots of things and lots of wonderful things, but it is that loneliness that takes root. And CASAs do a great deal at taking that loneliness away.
I think you're right, Andrew. I think it. I've been a casa now for 10 years, and I'm sure it's the most important thing I've ever done, and maybe ever will do. And a lot of it is just being there for the kid, the consistency. I keep my promises. I show up. She knows that I hear her. I understand her. I'm finding out what she needs, and I'm advocating for her. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a really important role.
Yeah.
So, what's in store for you? Because, as I said, you seem like a guy that really could take on the world and has and continues to do so. So, what's next on the horizon for you?
Well, I am working on another book.
Of course you are.
Of course I am. But and then also, I serve on Arizona's Foster Care Review Board, and so I advise the Superior Court on individual children's cases. I also do work advising departments, particularly in the areas of older foster children. So one of the special interests that I have when it comes to this area are, well, there are really two. One is how to support families so that we don't need to take their children from them,
Yes.
because they're, just to let people know, the vast majority, 70% of children who enter foster care have not been abused. They enter care because of neglect, and neglect very often means poverty. And we shouldn't address poverty by taking people's children.
Right.
And so I do a lot of work around that. And then also, I have never forgotten the kids that I knew growing up who stayed in foster care and who aged out and went so deep into the system that it felt they were nearly forgotten. And so that's what the child catcher is about. Those kids that go so deep into the system that they have very few contacts with their families, that they have very few contacts with their social workers, that they literally feel completely isolated. Those are the children that really hit me, and they hit me because those are the kids I most remember growing up.
Great. So, Andrew, I asked you late in the game, but is it possible that you have your book there that you perhaps would want to read a small section? If you don't, that's okay too.
Yeah, okay. Uh, Chapter 35. After I had Mom moved from her first group home and the Maricopa County Sheriff's deputies came for her, she never left that second one. The place was smaller, a single ranch-style house in a Phoenix suburb. 5 other residents lived there, all with serious mental illness. She preferred to stay in her room, and as much as I tried, she never wanted to take a walk or even rest in the backyard. I introduced her to my husband Scott, and she seemed to like him. Our visits together were quiet. I learned to keep questions to yes and no answers. Did she like her room, and was the soap she used all right? There were brief moments when who she was reappeared. I bought her a purse and makeup for her birthday, and gazing at them on her bed, she commented that the nail polish and lipstick didn't match. I smiled at the memory of a young mother who would have made the same remark, and the boy who would have made the same mistake. A childhood lasts forever. I was in Boston attending the college graduation of Scott's oldest son when the group home director called. Rushing to Logan Airport, I didn't make it back in time. My mom died on May 8th, 2022. We took her back to Colorado, and I asked Scott's sister Lori if she would fly in from California to give Mom's eulogy. I scheduled the graveside service for 11 a.m., and typical of me, we got there 15 minutes early. Other than staff from the funeral home, there were only 3 of us, and so I asked if we could get things started. While Scott and I listened on a barren bluff overlooking the plains, Lori opened her notes and began reading from the book of Job in the Old Testament. Then out of the blue, a white Toyota raced up the road toward us in a hail of dust. An older man and woman slipped in behind us, whispering their apologies for not arriving early. Lori went back to her Bible and finally finished. I asked for a moment alone, then kissed Mom's casket and told her I'd brought her home. Pacing back toward the strangers, I noticed Scott and Lori were grinning. Our guests were husband and wife. She was my second cousin, once removed. They'd driven up from Colorado Springs after reading the announcement in a local paper that previous day. They insisted on touring me around, going from plot to plot, explaining names and how they related to me in some distant way. The woman got her mother on her cell phone and told her that Hope was buried in the right row, under the only tree. I turned to take a last look at the mahogany casket resting in the sun, and a few feet away from me, the woman leaned into Scott and said, "You know, we wanted to do something. We just didn't know who took that little boy." I wrote the obituary for the New York Times. Hope Rice died on Mother's Day morning at the Banner Desert Medical Center in Mesa, Arizona. She was 79 years old. Born on September 2nd, 1942, Hope grew up in Grand Junction, Colorado. Her parents were Caroline Gingras and Albert Rice. Caroline sold makeup door to door. Albert was a ranch hand. Hope's younger brother, Terry, served as a private in the United States Army. Hope attended the Page Beauty School in North Hollywood, California. She was a hairdresser, a job she loved. She was a Midwest girl in the best sense, decent, brave, beautiful, and kind. Life demanded forgiveness, and she gave it. Hope leaves behind a heartbroken son, Andy Bridge, who even as a man will always be her boy.
Oh my goodness. So, Andrew, I want to ask you one other thing that I ask all my guests. And if you can dig deep for this, I'm sure you will. What is the one thing that no one would ever know about you unless you told them?
I would say that the thing that people don't know, of course, there are many things that people don't know about every person. Uh, the thing that people don't know that I experience on a fairly frequent basis, and that only the closest people to me know, is an absolute severe claustrophobia. Uh, I I get on an elevator, checking into a hotel, and if that elevator jolts for just the slightest moment, I will not take that elevator again. If asked when checking in, um, you know, we can put you on the seventh floor or the second, I'll take the second so I can take the stairs. I will always think when you use a public restroom of flipping the lock and whether the lock will open and allow me to get out. Um, and the reason for that is very clear to me. It all goes back to MacLaren. And what it goes back to is my very first day at MacLaren, after I'd been taken from my mom about 4 hours before. They asked me to strip for the gang showers. I was 6 years old. I had never been without my clothes in front of anyone other than my mom. And I just couldn't do it. And I said no. And so one of MacLaren's orderlies grabbed me by the head, dragged me through the hallways, down the stairs, and threw me into a basement room and kept me there. And since then, that sense of claustrophobia, that sense of no one coming, has always hung. So I suppose that would be it.
I'm so sorry, Andrew. I don't understand why people are so cruel to helpless children. I just do not get it. And I just thank God that there are people out there like you fighting for them.
Well, and you're doing it too. So I want to take a moment to give you, you're doing what you're doing and being a CASA. That is extraordinary. And they're lucky to have you, and I suspect you feel lucky to have them. And it's so wonderful that you're doing that.
Thank you, Andrew.
And
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to ask, I guess, one more thing, and that is there anything you'd like to share that we haven't covered, or that you just are thinking of now, or anything?
The only thing that the one thing that I would like is, right now there are roughly 420,000 children in foster care. That's at a given point in time. If you look at children that go in and out of the foster care system during a year, that number rises up to over 600,000 children in the United States. That is a big number. And I realize that not everyone, as much as I would like them to be, can become a CASA. Not everyone can leave a private practice and go out and become a children's rights lawyer. What I would like is for people to talk about it. And so what I would like most is the next time you drop your child off at their elementary school, ask their third grade teacher, how many foster children go to school here? Or the next time you go to the grocery store and you walk into Safeway or Ralph's, ask the checker or ask the manager, do you employ foster children? Do you give them summer jobs? Or bring it up. Just mention, did you know that on average there are 420,000 children in foster care tonight? And to just talk about it. And if we talked about it, I guarantee the end result is these children would not feel so alone.
I think you're right, Andrew. I think you're really right. Thank you again so much. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your writing. And thank you for the future work that I know you're going to do.
This has been absolutely lovely, Jane. I'm so glad we did this. Thank you so much. Thank you. This is it was a fun interview. It was also just fun spending so much fun and just amazing to spend time with you. Yeah.
Andrew, my goodness, thank you so much for coming onto the show and sharing your incredible story with us. Honestly, any kid that has you as an advocate is just simply lucky. It's been an honor to have you on. And one of the things that I wanted to point out that you referred to was that at any given time, there are 600,000 kids in foster care. And that's just in the United States. That's 600,000 kids that have been separated from their families. Hopefully, many of those are in kinship care, but highly unlikely. And knowing that there are those facilities that you spoke about that exist in the South and in California, and we've heard of many ourselves, then this is a huge problem that needs to be solved. So again, like you said, it needs to be talked about. We simply need to acknowledge the reality and the scope of this situation. Please stay tuned. We're releasing at least 2 episodes a month, so check in when you can, and be well. If you or someone you know is harming themselves or thinking about harming themselves, go to crisistextline.org. If you see something, say something. If you suspect a child's health or safety is jeopardized in any way by parents or anyone else, contact the Child Protective Services Agency in your county. 24-hour hotlines are staffed by trained social workers who will help you through the process, and you can do so anonymously. In California, you can call the Child Protection Hotline at 800-540-4000. So if you see something, say something. You might be saving a child's life. If you want to know more about becoming a CASA anywhere in the country, go to nationalcasagal.org. And in LA, casala.org. And if you want to know more about becoming a foster parent, check out the National Foster Parent Association at nfponline.org. There's also faithfosterfamilies.org and adoptuskids.org. There's tons of other information online as well, so you can just hunt around. We also want to thank the supremely talented Christina Apostolopoulos for her beautiful original music. You can find her music on Spotify or Instagram at Christina Aposta. And also thank you to Yukon Har for his engineering. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear and you find it as valuable as we do, please rate us and hit subscribe. You can also make a donation at bonusbabies.org. See you next time.